Hey, there's no change of clothes,
my husband says in his grumpy voice as usual.
Why can't you do such a simple thing? You live on my money.
Don't think you get so slack off just because you are pregnant.
You really are a useless wife.
If it had been me before, I would have just apologized. But I did not respond this time.
Hey, are you listening to me?
My husband shouts. However, I still did not respond. My husband seemed like he realized something by my strange attitude and gradually turned pale.
You already...
I laughed at the houseplant in front of me without looking at my husband. My name is Allie. I am an ordinary housewife. My husband David and I got married 3 years ago, after 2 years of dating. We are now expecting a child together, and my bumps is starting to get a little bigger.
Hey, I'm home.
I heard the front door open, and for a moment, I felt a lump in my chest. I heard footsteps, and soon, my husband entered the living room. His expression was grim as usual. Welcome home, David. I stopped preparing dinner and replied, but he didn't even take a glance at me and sighed heavily as he sat down on a sofa. I think it was about a year into our marriage that my husband, who had been so kind to me when we first started dating, began to change his attitude. The casual lovey-dovey stopped. The smiles disappeared. And now, even conversations has become rare. When we were newlyweds, if I was preparing a meal, he would always say,
I'll do something too.
And he would stand in the kitchen with me. But now, this is what happens. I watch my husband's back as he watches the news program, and a sense of despair wells up in me. Suddenly, I felt a kick on my stomach from the inside, which made my face break into a smile, and I patted it gently. Come to think of it, I think his attitude has become even colder since he found out I was pregnant. When I told him I was pregnant, he was surprised, but did not seem very happy. Thinking back on it, I felt sad and unconsciously let out a small sigh. I plated the food I had made and took it to the dining table. The two of us sat at the table, facing each other. As usual, there's no conversation. Only the clinks of dishes uncutterly echo in the room. Even so, it seems that humans are adaptable creatures, and we have become completely accustomed to this situation. Even if there is no conversation, even if there is no more love, we can still live our lives as husband and wife. As I continued to eat in silence, my husband unusually called me out.
Hey, today's lunchbox was only frozen food, wasn't it?
My husband doesn't like store-bought lunches, so every morning I make him something to bring for lunch. Even now that our relationship has changed, that had not. Last night and this morning, I wasn't feeling well, so much that it was difficult for me to stand in the kitchen, so I somehow managed to pack frozen food in his lunchbox. I'm sorry, I wasn't feeling well.
If this was work, you would be scolded, you know. You're not even working, and you were trying to find an easy way out,
my husband said coldly, as he nonchalantly carried food to his mouth. This kind of complaint from him has become a regular occurrence. I am so used to it that it doesn't hurt me anymore, and it makes me a little sad that it had become the norm for me. I repeated I'm sorry, but he didn't answer me, and after finishing his meal, he left without carrying his dishes to the sink. At the dining table, left alone, I sighed again. One fine afternoon, I was walking home from the bus stop after my checkup at the OBGYN. The progress was good, and the doctor told me that, in my dark and gloomy life, The presence of this child is the only thing that makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I felt a little more relaxed when I stroked my growing bump.
"Oh, Ali!"
A voice calls out to me, and I looked up. There was my neighbor, Mrs. Miller, waving at me with a friendly smile on her face. Mrs. Miller is a caring, talkative woman and one of my closest neighbors. Whenever I see her, she is always ready to chat and often offers me her homegrown vegetables. Today, as we were chatting as usual, Mrs. Miller said to me, "Oh, by the way," as if she had just remembered something. I tilted my head curiously, and she looked at me and said, "I saw it, you know. Yesterday, David was walking with a woman." What? According to Mrs. Miller's story, she saw my husband walking with a woman yesterday evening in front of the station. They were both wearing business clothes, and the woman might just be his co-worker, but they even had their arms linked. I don't think he could get away with that. I was surprised by the suddenness of the story, but I immediately denied it. It must have been someone else. He was at work yesterday and didn't get home until late. My husband's job is basically an inside job. He rarely goes outside to work.
"Is that right?"
Then maybe I had the wrong person. Mrs. Miller couldn't be sure, because she said she saw him only for a moment. After we had a couple of words of chit-chat, I left Mrs. Miller, who said,
"I'm sorry I talked for so long,"
and went into the house. As the front door closed behind me, the words I had just heard came back to my mind. I told Mrs. Miller that it must have been a mistake, but I had a slight idea of what she was talking about. My husband's feelings have left me, as evidenced by the way he's been behaving lately. I wouldn't be surprised if he is having an affair. I don't know if it's true or not, but I hear a lot of stories about husbands cheating on their wives during pregnancy. Once I started thinking that, I couldn't stop worrying about it. If that's the case, even if I thought about it, I wouldn't know the truth. Besides, I'm the kind of person who always needs to search until I know the truth. Then, I made up my mind and took out my cell phone from my pocket. About a month after that, I looked down with cold eyes at the pile of papers and photos spread out all over the table. I hired a detective to do a background check on my husband. As a result, David was indeed having an affair. I stared with a hateful look at the photos of my husband walking around the city looking like he is getting along well with this woman. And this woman next to my husband is... I was so angry that I scrunched up the photo with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Megan. Megan is my childhood friend and my best friend. I checked all the countless photos, wanted to think there must be some mistake. But no matter how many times I looked at it, it was indeed Megan. I had known her since I was a little girl, so there was no way I could have mistaken her. Why would she? We just met the other day. She hadn't given me the slightest indication. That alone was quite a shock to me. But the investigation documents sent by the detective gave me the stark reality. My husband and Megan had been in a relationship for 5 years. That meant it was from the time I started dating my husband. I had consulted Megan on various matters ever since David was still my boyfriend. When we decided to get married, Megan was the first person I told. The way she listened to me so kindly, the smile on her face when she said congratulations. Were they all lies? Was she sneering at me behind my back when I was filled with happiness? How could she betray me and still manage to smile at me like that? She's unbelievable. But so is my husband.
He knows very well my relationship with Megan. I've invited her over to my house countless times, and the three of us have hung out together many times. He knew, and he was unfaithful to me. Whatever little affection I had for my husband is gone now. I will never forgive him. Never. Anger welled up from deep within me. Like a torrent, it easily swept away and broke down the rationality that had been holding me back at the very last moment. I briskly brushed away the pile of papers on the table. Countless papers fluttered around the room. If you hurt me, you take double the payback. I'm home. It was a little after 10 p.m. My husband came home late as usual, and I completely ignored him. Only the sound of water rinsing the dishes echoed through the house. My husband came into the living room and took one look at me and said, "You could at least answer me." But I ignored that too. "I'm going to bed. Good night." I was about to leave the living room when... "Wait," my husband called out. "Hey, where's my food?" "I don't have any," I said coldly, and my husband looked surprised. Then his face turned red as he started yelling at me. "What's the matter with you? You live on my money, and you can't even prepare food for me?" Hearing his voice from my back, I closed the door to my room. I lay down on the mattress I had prepared on the floor. I can't bring myself to share a bed with my husband in this condition. I'm glad we have mattress for guests. My husband may have been intimidated by my attitude, as he didn't storm into my room. Well, what am I going to do now? Strangely enough, I am not anxious, and I am so calm inside that I could start laughing. I closed my eyes, thinking about my next move. Over the next few days, I continued the same strategy. I only prepare my own meals, and of course I don't make him lunch either. The washing machine is already full of clothes. I have ignored all of my husband's nonsense, such as do your work and at least make my lunch. Perhaps he was a bit flustered by my change in behavior over the past few days, and his tone of voice was becoming weaker and weaker day by day. A few more days passed. And then, one day, my husband stopped coming home. I hadn't heard from him, but I wasn't particularly worried. I chuckled as I hung the laundry out to dry for the first time in a long time. It was all going according to plan. There are only so many places my husband, with his limited social circle, could turn to. Just as I was thinking this, the phone rang. "Holly, it's me." "Mrs. Amber?" It was my mother-in-law on the other end of the phone. I knew my husband would run to his parents' house. I had already told my parents-in-law about his affair. I wanted him to see his parents' faces when I showed them the documents from the detective. My mother-in-law sobbed as she said, "I don't remember raising him like this." While my father-in-law coldly said, "He's no longer my son." Naturally, his parents did not let him in the house. So I guess there was only one place my husband could go next. I thanked my mother-in-law, hung up the phone, and got ready to leave. A familiar apartment. I glared at the familiar room, and I walked up the stairs. 2 flights upstairs. The room to the right. I rang the intercom by the door, and a woman's voice answered from the other side of the door, and the door opened shortly after. "Ali?" "Hello. I'm glad to see you're doing well." I smiled at the woman who used to be my best friend as she stiffened up. She tries to close the door, but I prevent her from doing so by putting my bag between the door. Her behavior convinced me that my prediction was right, and I opened my mouth. "You were taking good care of my husband, right? Can you go get him?" "There's no way he's here,"
What are you talking about? Coming in here out of the blue.
Megan, what's wrong?
Megan's urgent voice made my husband come out from the back of the room. I smiled at him, and his face stiffens too. I'm already aware of your relationship. Run or hide, it doesn't matter. I said this in a loud voice, so that my husband, who was trying to escape to the back of the room, could hear me clearly. I pushed Megan out of my way and stepped into the doorway to open my bag. I know everywhere you've been and everything you've been doing recently. I slammed the thick envelope on the floor, and a few of the photos inside fly out and flutter through the air. Megan picked up the photos and said, "What?" she muttered in a shaky voice. She picked up one photo after another, checked them, and looked at me with a frightened look on her face. My husband turned the envelope upside down. "You can tear up as much as you want. They're copies."
You don't do the housework, and you do this behind my back.
I don't want to be told that by you, who's been doing outrageous things behind my back. Sighing, I took out another piece of paper from my bag. I'm gonna get straight to the point. I thrust the paper at Megan, who had fell to her knees, and my husband, who looked indignant. I'm gonna charge you both alimony. I'll be in touch with you shortly with the details, so please be prepared. With that, Megan stood up as if she had come to her senses. Wait! Megan grabbed my shoulder with great force. After a moment of hesitation, she opened her mouth as if she had made up her mind. I'm engaged to someone. If he finds about this, he'll break off the engagement.
What?
So please, don't ask for alimony or tell anyone about the affair. Saying this, Megan pathetically scrambles to my feet and looks up at me with tears in her eyes. We're best friends, aren't we? It's not my fault. It's David who approached me. You'll let it slide, won't you? Right? I took a good 2 big breaths, then smiled and touched Megan's shoulder with a gentle hand. How could I let it slide? Don't act like we're best friends just when you're in trouble. Megan turns hopeless at my words. I push her away and turned to head out. I caught a glimpse of my husband, who was standing there and not even bothering to help Megan up, his shoulders shaking like a frightened little animal. Goodbye. I guess I'll see you in court next time. With these words, I left Megan's house. Before the door closed behind me, I heard them arguing. Judging from my husband's reaction earlier, Megan had not told him about the engagement. The door closed with a loud clank. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. Later, through my lawyer, I revealed the affair to Megan's fiancé. Eventually, the engagement was broken off. I heard through the grapevine that our relationship with my husband also ended because of this, and that she is now living a lonely life on her own. I declared our divorce to my husband and confronted him with the divorce papers. He first told me that he was deeply sorry and begged for another chance. But when I kicked him to the curb, he seemed to have given up and reluctantly signed the divorce papers. With this, I was finally free. A little later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. I went back to my parents' house, and with their help, I am living a happy and joyful life.